event planning GNOVIS rep, Ramat Jose, who is going to moderate our second panel. So Ramat, I'm going to have you take over.
Thank you, Erica. So we're moving into panel 2, which is considerations in voter ideology. So we have Parisa and Arjun, and they're both going to talk about different things ranging from how moderate Republican women vote to undecided voters. So we go to the next slide. So we have Parisa, who's going to present on how conservative women ticket splitting and trusting Trump. So I'm going to hand it over to Parisa.
Thank you so much, Ramat, Erica, the GNOVIS team. So my paper looks at the data around why moderate Republican women deviate from other Republican voting patterns, namely around ticket splitting during the 2022 midterm elections and how much they trust or don't trust former President Donald Trump. So the anticipated red wave did not occur during the most recent 2022 midterm elections, marking a shift from a historic trend where the House and Senate typically flip midway through a president's first term as a pushback against the party of the president who won 2 years earlier, in this case, Biden, being a Democrat. There's been much discussion of the disillusionment many Republicans have with former President Donald Trump, evident in both the 2020 and 2022 elections. However, getting to the root of how certain populations of Republicans, particularly moderate women, may have contributed to his losses has yet to be uncovered. So last semester in my Media and American Elections seminar taught by Professor Owen, we conducted a national 2022 midterm elections voter survey in conjunction with the Georgetown University Civic Education Research Lab. I have also always personally been interested in women's issues and voting patterns. So during my research in this class, I wanted to see if the patterns of female voters, particularly moderate Republican women, impacted the 2022 midterms. So here are my research questions. Does the level of trust in former President Donald Trump of moderate Republican women differ from other Republicans? And were moderate Republican women more likely to split their ticket during the 2022 midterm elections than other voters? And ticket splitting essentially means not voting along party lines. So you'll vote for like both, Democrats and Republicans, or maybe independents, as opposed to just voting down the line for Republicans, let's say. So I want to share a humorous quote as we get into my hypotheses that I uncovered during my literature review, diving into how moderate Republican women feel about Donald Trump. The disillusionment with Trump has hit suburban women and moderate Republicans. During a survey by the Republican Main Street Partnership, member and New York Representative Tom Reed stated, quote, "Trump's contentious style and rhetoric was also an issue with the suburban women we surveyed. It was an eye-opener to hear in focus groups how many women rated Trump unfavorably, saying that the president reminded them of their ex-husbands. And they just don't like the style, the effect the president has. All they're looking for is for people to be genuine." And we'll go to the next slide, please. Oh, I think it's my hypothesis, but okay. I can briefly talk about my hypotheses. So the results of the 2022 midterm elections showed dissent amongst the Republican Party for the Trump-endorsed candidates, and recent surveys and literature that I reviewed have shown a growing disillusionment among moderate Republican women in both Trump and blindly adhering to Republican Party ideology. Given these observations, my two hypotheses that I tested were: one, moderate Republican women distrust former President Trump more than strong Republican women or moderate Republican men. And two, moderate Republican women split their ticket in the 2022 midterms more than strong Republican women or moderate Republican men. And that is honestly coming to fruition when I did the data analysis and came up with these charts. So for this study, as I mentioned, I used a national representative survey of voters in the 2022 midterm elections conducted in my Media and American Elections class with Georgetown University's Civic Education Research Lab. The survey included a subsample of moderate Republican women, and very little empirical evidence directly addresses the voting patterns of this group. So this survey method is appropriate for analyzing this behavior. In this survey, I used different kinds of key terms and questions that we included, such as party identification. Do you consider yourself a Republican, Democrat, or independent? Party ideology. Do you consider yourself to be liberal, moderate, or conservative? And gender identity, being male or female. Variables to and use those variables to identify moderate Republican women. To test my first hypothesis, I cross-tabulated these variables with trust in Donald Trump, as you can see in my figure 1 chart. And then for my second hypothesis, I analyzed ticket splitting. Did you split your ticket in the 2022 midterms for my second chart? So for the first chart, when reviewing the data on what groups found former President Donald Trump to be a trustworthy source, which you can see along the top line of the chart, moderate Republican women were among the outliers of their fellow conservatives. So voters who identified as strong Republican men or women had some of the highest percentages of trusting Donald Trump. Strong Republican men were 34.5% likely to trust Trump a lot. Strong Republican women were 31.4% likely to trust Trump a lot. However, moderate Republican men and women percentages fell drastically when it came to trusting Trump to about 14.9% and 12% respectively. Interestingly, the most significant findings are revealed for when controlling for not trusting Trump at all. Strong Republican men and women ranged between 5 to 8%, as you can see along the bottom line of that chart. And while moderate Republican men were 11.5% to say that Trump is untrustworthy. However, moderate Republican women tripled their response, with 31% asserting that Trump is untrustworthy. Which brings us to chart 2, when these findings intersect with how moderate Republican women ticket split. So when I initially reviewed the ticket splitting data, there was not enough of a statistically significant trend to pull out moderate Republican women. However, when I controlled for trust in Donald Trump, the relationship appears and accounted for the ticket splitting. So I cross-tabulated the data on how low moderate Republican women's trust of Trump is, and found that those moderate Republican women who strongly distrust Trump were 64.1% more likely to split their ticket during the 2022 midterm elections, compared to that 3.4% of strong Republican women who didn't trust Trump and split their ticket. That's a drastic difference. Essentially, even if strong Republican women don't trust Trump, they'll still vote along party lines. But if moderate Republican women don't trust Trump, they simply won't just vote Republican. They'll split their ticket when voting. So next slide, key findings, please. So my key findings were that trust in Trump is an essential factor in explaining the behavior of moderate Republican women in the 2022 midterms. 31% of them don't trust Trump at all, and 64.1% of them, when they didn't trust Trump, split their ticket in those 2022 midterm elections. So these 2022 results for moderate Republican women are a consistent trend, building on the 2020 presidential election, where I found that 52.6% of moderate Republican women ticket split and had a low trust in Trump. So these findings show a strong correlation between moderate Republican women choosing to split their ticket in the latest midterm elections and their lack of trust in the former president. So in conclusion, this research gives additional insight into the elusive mentality of why moderate Republican women vote the way they do, and why the 2022 midterm elections were not the red wave as expected. Their distrust of Trump, and by extension, the candidates he endorsed, has impacted their voting decisions. These findings in this data show a strong correlation between how distrustful moderate Republican women are of Donald Trump and how likely they are to split their ticket. And as seen in my literature review that will be featured in the GNOVIS paper, suburban and moderate Republican voters have often been overlooked for their more conservative counterparts, with views on certain issues actually skewing more liberal. And this demographic has also become the most disillusioned with Trump's mannerisms and trustworthiness in politics, as indicated by the ex-husband's quote that I mentioned earlier. These results highlight how necessary it is for the Republican Party to shift their candidates away from Trump-endorsed individuals to maintain this segment of voters. Moderate Republican women can have a greater effect on the party's hold over Congress and possibly in upcoming presidential elections by lacking trust in their party's candidates and splitting their ticket when voting. Thank you.
Thank you, Parisa. That was super fascinating. In general, like looking at Republican women, how they vote is definitely something that, we should all be looking towards. So next we're going to Arjun, who's going to look at the mystery of undecided voters, a statistical analysis to understand why undecided voters are so undecided. So pretty similar to Parisa, but it's going to be a statistical analysis, and I'm going to hand over to Arjun.
Great, thank you very much. If you go to the next slide, please. I want to just start with a quick background and get a little audience question as well. But just to start with a quick background on what really interested me in this topic. A little while ago, and I would say early first semester, or excuse me, early last semester, I came across a quote that said, after 4 years, 2 conventions, 4 debates, and millions in TV spots, how clueless do you have to be to call yourself undecided? And this really made an impression on me because I always took undecided voters to be very educated, very politically aware, interested. And I, recall in 2016 during the, in 2008 or 2012 election, excuse me, in the town hall debate between then Governor Romney as well as then President Obama, the questions that arose were very educated, very much concerned about the state of the United States. And that was always the impression that I had. And reading this, it essentially invalidated everything I understood about undecided voters. And that's what really brought me to want to do a statistical analysis to understand why undecided voters are so undecided. But I also want to ask you, do you think that undecided voters are extremely interested in politics, or are they indifferent towards politics? And feel free to throw it in the chat. Okay. What we can do actually is, if you have opinions about this, feel free to share it throughout our conversation. But Dr. Kaliska says it really depends. I definitely agree with that, and we're going to learn that actually through the presentation, that it really does depend, because even the literature is still trying to identify if it is or if they are undecided for a particular reason. Are they extremely interested in politics, or are they indifferent towards politics? And if you go to the next slide, please. The interest in politics, again, it's very divided. The literature says, referencing 2016, for example, that undecided voters were very angry. They were really unhappy with the direction the country was going. They felt the US system was failing them. Alternatively, in literature advocating that they are not interested in politics or that they are indifferent towards politics, it advocates that they don't care about politics. They're not watching any kind of debates or any kind of political channels, etc. And that no matter how you define them, they're uninterested, they're indifferent towards politics. And that was really what I was trying to understand is it one or the other, or does it, like Dr. Kaliska said, does it really depend? I wanted to, if you go to the next slide, please. And similarly, I talked a bit about the debate that I watched that really brought me to the understanding that that undecided voters are very interested in debates. They're very interested in politics. And I wanted to understand this as well from the literature, as well as in the data, which I'll talk about in a moment, that are they interested in debates, or is there an influence from debates on undecided voters or not? And the literature says, some literature advocates that yes, there is. Undecided, debates are a last minute cram session for the voting public, and it has a bigger impact on undecided voters who are consistently engaging in debates, who are watching television, watching politics, and are more politically educated. Whereas alternatively, those that are not watching politics, it will have less of an impact on them. And then alternatively, there was more, I would say, very literature that says that it's not the case, that it isn't the case where debates have an influence on undecided voters, because undecided voters are indifferent towards politics. They're not going to be swayed. And those voters that actually are decided, it just reaffirms their belief in the candidate that they selected, or it more so is just a watch for them, just to watch it, because they already know who they're gonna vote for, and this is just another opportunity to see their candidate and reaffirm it. And if you could go to the next slide, please. And that's what really brought me to my research questions and hypothesis. I'll give you a moment to read through it, but high level, it really was to understand two main questions, or two main ideologies, right? One is that what are undecided voters indifferent towards politics, or are they greatly immersed and interested in politics? Secondly, are people who are indifferent towards politics more likely to be undecided voters? And then what is the impact of debates, right? How interested are undecided voters in debates? And that was the third research question I had. If you go to the next slide, please. Similar to Parisa, The data that we collected was from a national survey that we conducted in Dr. Owen's Media and American Elections class. It was roughly about 2,000 participants who took the survey. And if you look through, I'm going to say high level with respect to the data analysis, but if we look at the contingency tables and really put that in the perspective of debates, the contingency tables were set to test the hypothesis to see if debate performance affected time of decision. And then additionally to that, if looking at the regression model, regression really was to really understand how much influence does time of decision have on the debate variable while still holding constant the effect of political interest, right? Over and above your political interest, how much influence does time of decision have on debates? And if you could move to the next slide, please. And really the key finding is it's really fascinating because our study and the data support the ideology that undecided voters are indifferent towards politics. But this is interesting because in 2016, as evidenced by the literature, it shows that they are very interested in politics, right? They were angry, they were unhappy with the way the country was going. And what this really shows me is that in 2016, there was this revival of undecided voters with a strong interest and understanding of politics because they felt the country was headed in the wrong direction, right? And the findings from the survey suggest that when a country is in a state where parties have undesirable perceptions, participants have negative feelings towards both candidates, both parties, there is this revival of undecided voters who have a strong interest as well as a strong understanding of politics. When undecided voters that are strongly interested and understanding of politics, when they find one party more desirable than the other, and they can decide, undecided voters who have this strong interest, understanding of politics, have selected their candidate, and the undecided voter remains, right? And these findings, they don't suggest that it's one or the other, but rather it suggests that it's an abundance of one or the other, right? There is more undecided voters who are greatly immersed in politics and have a good understanding of politics as opposed to the opposite or vice versa. And that really just shows that there are two distinct types of undecided voters. To Dr. Kaliska's point, it really depends on the environment based on the circumstances I stated earlier. And what I think future studies can do is they can really evaluate what are the key indicators, what are the markers that will suggest that if a landscape is more likely to have undecided voters that are greatly immersed in politics and understand politics, or alternatively, that are indifferent towards politics. That's a very high level overview of the paper. And I go more in depth into the statistics in the paper itself, but thank you for your time.
Thank you, Arjun. That was really great. So next, we're going to go to faculty remarks with Dr. Owen and open Q&A. So turn it over to you, Dr. Owen.
Thanks very much, Ramat. First of all, I'd like to congratulate all of the presenters here today. I wasn't familiar with the first three papers, but I learned a lot, and they were extremely sophisticated and interesting, and they spanned a wide range of topics. And I would really encourage any CCT students and others to submit your work to GNOVIS, because I think the experience is great. I also like to give my congratulations and appreciation, I guess, to the GNOVIS team. I've been involved with these two papers kind of from their inception because they were written in my media and elections class. And then I've been kind of working with them a little bit on revising the papers to get them into shape for publication next week. And the GNOVIS team has really provided such really strong feedback. I mean, the reviews are as tough as you get with any professional journal in academia. And so I just commend you all. So I want to talk a little bit about Parisa's paper. And it looks like moderate Republican women are finally making it onto the map for Republican candidates. I was listening to this morning to Chris Christie, who seems like he's going to be throwing his hat into the ring. And his goal is to attract moderate Republicans who he feels are being alienated by Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis. And he did mention, kind of moderate Republican women as a group that was not going to be, kind of tracking with Trump or DeSantis, and kind of indicated that he himself would probably be the answer. I think that the media themselves if they focus on Republican women at all, or if they focus on anything outside of, looking at Trump's base versus, maybe others that are anti-Trump, they tend to, as Parisa argues, focus a lot more on conservative Republican women who seem to be more outspoken and, kind of are able to garner a lot of attention that way. But moderate Republican women actually make up a larger percentage of that the Republican female constituency by far than, the extreme conservative women. So I have a couple of questions I'd like to ask Parisa, and maybe have, kind of a little bit more of a discussion on this. Why do you think that there's been so little attention paid to Republican women, but specifically to moderate Republican women? The fact that they seem to almost be in the shadows of the Republican Party, and given the way that moderate Republican women have reacted against, the current status of the party, particularly their distrust of Trump, and the fact that they're willing to at least split their ticket and defect in that way, what do you think might be the potential for moderate Republican women to actually switch parties and defect completely to the Democrats? Or why do they remain in the fold? And there's something that we couldn't handle because of the way we asked the questions about issues. We didn't have a ton of space to deal with issues in detail. But I'm wondering, will the abortion issue, which seemed to come into play in 2022, be a driver for moderate Republican women in 2024? And what about some of these other issues, such as education and getting involved in kind of the book banning debate and other things? So I have a number of other questions, but that's an awful lot to start with. And I don't know whether I should ask both. Ramat, would you like me to ask all my questions and do all my comments at once, or do one paper at a time?
I think we should do one paper at a time.
Okay, great. So I'm going to throw it back to Parisa.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'll try to remember all the parts of your question. But at least to the first part, I think it's partially because the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? The more outspoken women in the Republican Party are often the more conservative or higher profile. Like, let's say you have Liz Cheney, I don't know if she's necessarily moderate, like as moderate as some of the people who may have answered our survey, but she's also just a high profile individual, but she's one of the few. You think of the more extreme cases, they're very pro-Trump, very outspoken, always, kind of in the public eye, front page of the media, so I think there's just this focus on the more conservative women in the Republican Party. They're just the loudest. And I think that there's this kind of assumption that, we'll just, the Republican women will vote Republican. I don't think that people really, I hate to say, cared to take a look at the way that moderate Republican women voted. And I think that now there is that shift, because when I was doing the literature review, there just wasn't a lot out there. Even the quote I had from the Main Street Republican Partnership, when they were kind of like, okay, how do we tap into these more moderate voters, specifically like suburban women and suburban voters? The ex-husband quote that I just love, that was, I think, taken in the last, like 3-4 years. That was when that survey was done. Before then, there wasn't that kind of outreach to the community. So I think there was just the assumption, you'll just vote with your party, even if you don't really like them, you'll just vote with your party, like the strong Republican women did. But that's not the case, as we've seen in the data results. So that's kind of the first portion of the section. Then remind me again what the second.
I was just going to ask you to speculate about 2024, and I could maybe sum that up a little bit. If you are a Republican candidate for president, what's your strategy to get these women back into the fold?
Well, so part of it is kind of like what you see Chris Christie doing. There's this desire, I think, amongst moderate Republicans, specifically moderate Republican women, to not have someone who's name calling or acting belligerent. You want this kind of genuine, kind of like more traditional, if you will, Republican to be the face of the party. I think that's what they're looking for, someone who's a little bit more genuine, or like a, let's say a former, like a John McCain kind of person. So I think there's a desire to see that kind of go back to that kind of traditional Republican, which was a little bit more, not necessarily moderate, but a little more polished. So I think they're looking for that. And when it comes to issue areas, which I know you'd mentioned, I think in your first question, I know we didn't necessarily source all the issues in our survey. That would be really interesting research just to continue further. But I think there were things like, while moderate Republican women do skew a little bit more liberal on, let's say, even gun control or healthcare issues, than their stronger or more conservative counterparts. There could be issues that are a little bit more like bridging the gap, like let's say a healthcare thing or childcare and child safety. And that kind of ties into gun violence essentially. So I think that there are ways for the Republican platform and for future candidates to be less extreme and maybe tap into some of those more moderate ideologies that make moderate Republican women a little bit more feel comfortable with those kinds of candidates, that it's not just full extreme, far right, no holds barred, no compromise at all. Maybe if there's a little bit of a healthcare example or a childcare aspect going into it, they'd be more likely to vote that way. I think I remember abortion wasn't actually a huge issue that came up, which was very interesting. So it wasn't the main factor in why they did not vote for, or why they did ticket split and didn't just vote Republican. So that was an interesting finding, but again, it would be interesting to dive into that a little more, and we didn't necessarily have all the survey questions to answer that.
Yeah, you can only do so much, and I still am always just blown away by the trust factor. And I remember when Brenda said to you, when you kind of had mixed findings or non-findings, what about trust? You threw it in there, and wow, 64% of the moderate Republican women who don't trust Trump ticket split, compared to 3.4% of the strong Republican women who don't trust. Rarely do you get those kinds of findings in social science. So I want to turn now to Arjun's paper. And what I really appreciate about this paper is he brings together two literatures in political science that really have kind of, as he calls it, kind of, there's still a mystery to what the real story is. First, he looks at the idea of undecided voters, and the literature is very split on this. You know, sometimes it seems like they're the most interested and they really are trying to get the most information so that they can make up their minds and be informed. Other literature indicates that they're the disinterested voters, which is kind of where Arjun's findings come out. But it seems that, and even in the same election campaign, based on how, you know, kind of the concept is operationalized, how it's measured, you know, different authors come up with different conclusions about the notion of undecided voters. And I think that might be one reason why that literature is fairly small. It's something that's, you know, it's a literature that's really kind of hard to reckon with in terms of the fact that the findings are so divided. And then he also brings into the discussion the notion of debates. And, you know, there is a huge literature on the importance of debates, or whether they're not that important, or the role that they perform. And a big finding throughout that literature is that debate effects are primarily reinforcing effects. So people who already have their mind made up watch the debate so that they can get ammunition that will allow them to, you know, kind of counter people who disagree with them or reinforce their own decision making. And the issue of what it does for the undecided, which is something that is addressed in that literature, is again kind of left up for grabs and seems to be very divided. So this notion that we have these two literatures that are still, you know, kind of very much contested, and they're brought together in this paper, is something that I really think is important. I also love the way that Arjun set up his hypotheses he did something that I think should be done more in social science. He set up plausible competing hypotheses and then set out to test them. So he has the two different sides of the argument about, kind of interest and undecided voters, and then he makes a direct test of that. I also think that, and I'm going to ask Arjun, this is where my question is coming in. One of the things that I noticed is that there's the undecided voters in the midterm elections seem to be the ones that are even more disinterested than those in presidential elections. And I was wondering if you have any insights or thoughts about the fact that when you were talking about, kind of the 2016 election, and I'd say even the 2020 election, where the undecided seem to be more interested, more engaged compared to the 2022 midterms. Does this have anything to do with the type of election?
Yeah, thank you for your comments and your question. I think, from my perspective, I would say I think there's research that shows that undecided voters account for 15 to 30%, and this number reduces to 5 to 10 ahead of the week before election day. And what's really interesting about that is this is something from a presidential election standpoint, because that's the grand stage. There is always more attention given to it. And because it is a smaller election, that could play into why there is more disinterest, because it is a smaller election comparatively to the presidential election. From what I've learned, I do believe that is a factor. And I think future studies could take this and put it again and, run this data in a presidential election. But I definitely do believe that is a factor, because it is a smaller election. There is less, if you're undecided and say you are not as interested in presidential elections, in elections as it is, and in politics, and are indifferent towards it, there is a higher potential that you would miss out on a Senate election, or you miss out on a midterm, comparatively to the presidential election.
Also, midterms are a lot harder to follow. They're kind of, they're statewide races, they're more complex. I think that, people that really aren't that interested to begin with are going to withdraw and then maybe try to catch up kind of toward the end. One of the other things I think that comes through with that figure about the, the big disparity in the percentage of undecided in a campaign, I think the number of undecideds has been growing in, kind of recent decades. I mean, the seminal work on that is V.O. Key. He had a seminal article that it was in like the 1940s on time of voting decision. And he found that, a majority of Americans in most elections had their mind made up before they even had a candidate because they were so party oriented. And I think maybe you may agree with this, the fact that we have people that are moving away from, have been for a while now, decades now, moving more and more away from strong identification with the political party, that it makes this notion of, you're not using that perceptual screen. So you end up, kind of, and if you're not paying attention, you end up undecided and have to make up your mind late in the campaign.
Absolutely, and it drives the further importance of undecideds, because they can they can be the difference between winning a literature shows. They can make a difference between winning and losing.
Absolutely. Well, I see that our time is up. So
thank you, Dr. Owen, and thank you, Arjun. So we're going to move into closing remarks with our editor, Andrew and Erica. So
thank you, everyone. And I'm sorry we didn't get to all the Q&A, but again, please follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We will continue the conversation there. So I appreciate all the questions that came through. Before we close out, I'd like to pass it back to our editor-in-chief, Andrew Peacock, who is going to say a few thoughts, and then I will close out. Andrew, take it away.
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew Peacock. If you haven't met me before, I've had the absolute pleasure of working with this team as editor-in-chief this year. But first and foremost, I want to thank everyone for coming to this colloquium, where we can, after months and months of peer review, of editorial review and copy edits, come together and converse about these ideas and the thoughts, the theories behind these works. So first, thank you, Erica and Ramon, for putting this event together in the first place and creating the open space to produce this dialogue, providing spaces for this interdisciplinary inquiry sits very deeply within Novus and within CCT or history. So as Kaliska mentioned early on in the colloquium, the lifeblood of Novus is truly grounded within this idea of interdisciplinary research, and specifically within its name. So you have Greek gnosis and Latin visus, knowledge and vision, which collapses a term from a dead language with that of a classical liberal arts gravitas that highlights the mission that Novus essentially aims to achieve. We propel knowledge that does not simply provoke insight, but energizes scholarship that shapes and anticipates the future. So today, 23 years since its founding, I'm happy to say that Novus remains within this ambitious space. Novus this year has been a dozen of diverse and inquisitive minds. I have to first thank the authors who presented today and those being published in the journal next week, next Friday, April 28th. In volume 23, we have Parisa, Arjun, Anna, Genevieve, Steph, and Maj Hardikar, who couldn't join us today. But thank you all for your sincere and thoughtful contributions to the community. We are thrilled to have you as Novus authors. Also to be found in volume 23 for the first time in Novus history is 7 book reviewers. So we have 7 book reviews written by students of CCT, James Doyle, Akansha Cheko, Paula Garcia Acuna, Kashaf Rashid, Hala Hawatme, Erica Hiran-Moon, and Ramat Jos. These 7 scholars have produced very thoughtful insights and critiques on recent or relevant literature. Be sure to check them out next week. And to our 17-member peer review team, anonymous but mighty, thank you for performing a unique and vastly important role in ensuring our submissions were valid and coherent, well-cited, and unassuming. To our faculty advisors, Dr. Kaliska, Ayuhitan, and Nate Garlick, thank you for being there when we inevitably hit some obstacles throughout the year, and for devoting your time and energy into giving us advice and support when we needed it. And also a hearty thank you to Paula Garcia Acuna, who put together this incredible cover design. It encompasses vast elements from this year's journal, from the individual articles therein. The social media bot represents Anna's inquiry into the disinformation spread by bots in the 2022 Chilean plebiscite. The meta icon represents tech company Meta, as Genevieve discusses the pertinence of including the company and others among global cyber policy structures. The Bridgerton Lady Whistledown portrait signifies our need to constantly critique the media products we consume and the ideologies we propagate, and they propagate. The I voted sticker functions as a reminder that our ability to vote is fragile, and Arjun attempts to illuminate the undecided voter population. The Republican Elephants introduces Parisa's inquiry into moderate Republican women, reminding us that there are intricacies within voting populations that cannot be ignored, especially among women. The Lambda finally symbolizes gay culture and rights, as Maj Hardikar's research delves into the commodification of gay aesthetics on TikTok and YouTube. Paula, I think it's worth stating that you nailed it. Thank you. And to hit it home, thank you to the Novus team. I seriously could not have asked for a more thoughtful, constructive, and inspiring team of individuals to produce this journal with. Erica, this is the second journal we produced together, the second colloquium I've seen you produce as well. It has been an absolute honor to work with you, to garner your critiques throughout the years, and to see you craft multiple colloquiums and events from the ground up. Genevieve, your perspective in physically crafting the layouts and design of the journal this year with me was essential, and collaborating with you to make the best draft possible for production next week and publication was always easy. Thank you. And Ramat, though you came in just before we began to review all of the content for the journal, it was a hectic time, but you have been a proactive and enthusiastic editor, and your contributions to the editorial review and event planning were spectacular. And to both Ramont and Genevieve, who are taking forward the team next year as the senior editors. I know I can speak for Erica as well when I say we know you both will carry forward Novus with enthusiasm and grace. We cannot wait to see what you do with the Novus platform and how you make it your own. And finally, thank you to CCT, the community, for upholding and inspiring us. You are the ones who give us the space to grow and allow students this medium to thrive. So thank you.
All right, well, I know we're over time, so I'm just going to go through this quickly and be our resident broken record. Our journal is coming out next Friday, April 28th. Please follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We'll also be sending out the copy via email. You will also find it on our website at novisjournal.georgetown.edu. I do want to do a quick call out to say that the majority of our authors this year were first-year CCT students, which is really cool. So if you are joining us as a admitted CCT or moving into the next cohort starting in the fall, please don't hesitate to reach out to your professors, to reach out to next year's Novus team, which includes Ramont and Johnby, to start developing your ideas and developing your research right off the bat. So first years are welcome to submit, second years are welcome to submit, and alumni are also welcome to submit. So thank you, everyone. This concludes our 2023 Novus Colloquium, and look forward to that journal, and good luck to Ramont and Johnby for our 2023. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.